Okay, so we're going to be looking at graphing slope-intercept form, and if you remember, we talked about slope-intercept form. Whoops. Slope-intercept form looks like this guy here. Y equals mx plus b. Now, we talked about, when we're looking at y equals mx plus b, this slope-intercept form, that the slope was m, right? That guy right there represents the slope. However, think about the name. Slope-intercept form. Okay, so that's what we call this guy, slope-intercept form, the y equals mx plus b. Well, notice in the name it says slope and intercept, okay? The name tells you what the equation has. So one of the parts that we've already identified is m represents the slope, but what we haven't already identified is that b over here, that represents the y-intercept. The y-intercept. You might say, well, Mr. Pinksterhouse, what does that mean? Okay, well, the y-intercept, that describes where we're going to start with our graph, but it's where it crosses the y-axis, okay? So somewhere along here, maybe our, let's go back here. Maybe our line crosses here, okay? Notice this line crosses the y-axis at 2. That would be, then 2 here, that guy right there would be considered to be the y-intercept, okay? So the y-intercept would be 2, or we could say the point 0, 2, okay? That guy right there would be the y-intercept of this line because it crosses the y-axis at 2, okay? So that's what we want to keep in mind when we're working through this. Now, I'm going to go back here, and let's look at our equation, okay? So the two pieces of information we need to work with here is we need to be able to identify the slope and we need to be able to identify the y-intercept. Why? Because this is where we're going to start on the graph, where we cross the y-axis, and this is going to be how we're going to get there next. We're going to use our rise over run. See if I can write that a little better. Rise over run. We're going to use that to get to the next point. Okay, so that's where we're going to start, where we cross the y-axis. Okay, so we're going to start with the y-intercept where we cross the y-axis, then we're going to use that rise over run, our slope, to get to the next point. Okay, so that's why we need to be able to identify m and b, so we know where we're starting b and where we're going to next, how to get to that next point, m, the rise over run. Okay. Now, let's look at this example here. It says identify the slope and the y-intercept of each line. Well, in this case, my slope, m, would be negative 1/2. Okay, that would be m, negative 1 over 2. In other words, my rise over run is I'd go down 1. Let's even write that down 1, right 2. Okay, so that's my slope here, negative 1 over 2. I'm going down 1 and right 2. But my b, the y-intercept, so we always represent the y-intercept as b. The b is a positive 1. The b is a positive 1. So that's where I'm going to cross the y-axis at. The y-axis is at 1. Okay? Now b, we always start with b where we cross the y-axis at. So my y-intercept, this is the y-axis, we're going to cross it at 1. Okay, so that's what we need this for, is that's where we're going to cross at on the y-axis, is at a positive 1. Now, to get to the next point, I got to follow this, my slope. I have to go down 1 and right 2. So that's how we're going to get to the second point, is we have to go down 1, right 2. So the second point on my line would be at 2, 0. Now, connecting those two, this would be the graph of the line for that equation, okay? So let's just double check this here. My b is a 1. I cross the y-axis at 1. My slope is a negative 1/2. I went down 1, right 2, okay? So that would be the graph of the line for this equation, okay? Now, second one, again, we have to identify our m and our b, our slope and our y-intercept. Well, the slope here would be 3, so m is 3. Now, to help us with our rise over run, technically 3 can be written as 3 over 1. So what that really means is we're going up 3. My rise is a positive 3, and my run is a positive 1. So we're going right 1. So when we do our rise over run, we're going to go up 3 and right 1. Now, what's my B? B, be careful here, don't forget the sign, don't forget your sign. B is a negative 5. So my y-intercept, whoops, try that again. My y-intercept is going to be a negative 5, so I cross the y-axis at a negative 5. That's where I'm starting at. So we always start with B, okay? We always start with B, our negative 5. We're crossing this y-axis at a negative 5. That's my first point. That's where I cross the y-axis at. That's my y-intercept, okay? So that's our B. Then we use M to find the next point. Well, I have to follow my slope. My slope is a positive 3, so I'm going up 3, right 1. 3 over 1. Up 3, 1, 2, 3, and right 1. So these would be the 2 points that are on my line. Okay? So we can connect these. And don't forget to put arrows at the end to indicate that our line's going on forever. Okay? But just to double check this here. So our y-intercept, our B, is a negative 5. So I cross the y-axis at a negative 5. Our M is 3 over 1, up 3, 1, 2, 3, and over 1. So that would be my line. Okay, so that's how we graph slope-intercept form. Now, the special cases that we looked at before, where we're dealing with zero slope and undefined slope, which situation is this? Y equals 3. Is that a zero slope or undefined? It's zero slope because that's a horizontal line. So remember when we were talking about slope, this guy is going to give a zero slope. It's zero slope. It's a horizontal line. So our slope here is going to be 0. Now, here's the tricky part. Y equals 3. What would the y-intercept be? Okay, what would the y-intercept be? Well, it'd be 3 because every y value in our line should be a 3. In other words, I cross the y-axis at 3. So I'm going to be crossing the y-axis at 3 because every point on this line will be a y value of 3. No matter where I plot a point, the y value will always be 3. So when I cross the y-axis, it will also cross at 3. Okay? So our B is going to be 3 here. Okay? So the first thing we need to plot again is B equals 3. And since our slope is 0, that means we have a horizontal line. Okay, so all we need to know is that every y value is going to be a 3, and we have a horizontal line right through our y-intercept there. Whoops, that was bad. Right through our y-intercept there. Okay, man, just having a hard time drawing today. There we go. All right, so y equals 3. Notice, every single y value is a 3. 1, 3, maybe use a different color so you can see it. 1, 3, 2, 3, 3, 3, 4, 3, 5, 3, and so on. So this would be the graph of y equals 3. Okay? They cross at a positive y3 on the y-axis. Now this one is the exact opposite. Instead of having a slope that is 0, it has a slope that is undefined because it's a vertical line and every x value is a 3, okay? So this one says that every x value is going to be a 3. In other words, I'm crossing the x-axis at 3 and every point will also have an x value of 3. So every single point on this line will have an x value of 3, okay? So in other words, the slope is undefined because we have a vertical line. Okay, the slope is undefined because we have a vertical line. And the B, well, there is no B. Okay, so in this case, there is no y-intercept. Why is that? Do we ever cross the y-axis if I have a vertical line that goes right through x equals 3? So if this is the graph of x equals 3, do I ever cross the y-axis here? No, there is no y-intercept. Now, is it possible to have a y-intercept if you have an x equals? Well, if my x equals 0, wouldn't I pass right through the y-axis here? Yeah, in other words, I'd cross every point on the y-axis, okay? But in our case, we don't cross the y-axis here, so there would be no y-intercept, okay? There is no y-intercept and the slope is undefined. But remember, when we say x equals 3, that's a vertical line that crosses right at x equals 3 here, okay? Every x value would be a 3. Notice, I have 3, 0, 3, 1, 3, 2, 3, 3, 3, negative 1, 3, negative 2, and so on. All of those points have an x value of 3. So just to recap here, okay, make sure you are able to identify your M and your B. B tells you where you start, where you're crossing the y-axis. M tells you how to get to the next point. In that case, it was a down 1 over 2. So that gave us our second point so that we can draw our line. Then, if we have a y equals, that's a horizontal line that crosses the y-axis at that value. In this case, it crossed the y-axis at 3. If we have x equals, that's a vertical line that crosses the x-axis at that value. In this case, it crossed at x equals 3. Okay?